A relatively newer area of interest and research with respect to obesity is in the area of sleep. Sleep is a hot topic these days. The importance of sleep hygiene and getting enough sleep, as we probably all know, is important for our concentration and focus and perceived energy levels throughout the day. But in this lecture, what I'm going to hopefully help support is the pretty clear association there is between sleep deprivation or sleep restriction, not getting enough sleep, and an increased risk of overweight and obesity. And then we'll talk a little bit about the mechanisms as to why sleep restriction might increase obesity risk. And then I'll end off with a little bit of like, how do you get a better night's sleep? And the idea here is when we're working with individuals with obesity, or we're working with their own weight, there are so many different reasons why we are currently in the body that we're in. And if we are at a larger size and that is impacting our health, there are multiple areas to potentially intervene. There are multiple reasons why we're in a larger body, and there's multiple ways that we can make a difference in that. And so sleep is a big one. It's a really interesting one, and that's what we're going to cover in today's presentation. So I thought I'd start with some research in undergrads because that's the main audience of this video. And this was research that was done in almost 1,600 college-age students in 5 different universities. So it was a paper study in universities in the United States and in universities in South Korea, looking at what association. So if you say you get this many hours of sleep, you're rated. So if you get under 7 hours of sleep, you're rated as having short sleep duration. If you get between 7 and 9 hours of sleep, you are said to have normal sleep, and then anything above 9 hours of sleep was considered long sleep duration. And then since people answered what their average sleep duration was, we could also use information about their body weight and other factors to see if there was a correlation between sleep duration and body weight. And that is what we found. So compared to normal weight participants, individuals with overweight were about 50% more likely to have shorter sleep duration, and individuals with obesity were almost 70% more likely to have shorter sleep duration. So there's some sort of association with that. And what's interesting in this study is they also found there was an association between longer sleep duration. We're not really going to touch on this, but individuals with obesity were also way more likely to sleep for more hours. And one of the main themes that I do want to express in this presentation is that it's unclear kind of which way the direction of these associations work. So is it that slow sleep duration is promoting overweight and obesity, and I'll give you some mechanisms that could support that? Or is it that once someone is overweight or obese, that affects their sleep duration? And it's probably a little bit of both. We've learned about obstructive sleep apnea, for instance, in this class, and we know that that can affect length of sleep and quality of sleep as well. Okay, but this first study really did show us that there's an association between shorter sleep duration and higher risk for both overweight and obesity. And what's interesting is to throw in a race and nationality angle too, is that they did find a higher risk for shorter sleep duration in Black individuals in these populations. So that's, I don't think the authors really had a reason for that, but that is an interesting finding of this study as well. So first study, we do paper survey, we compare hours of sleep that you say with your body weight, and there is an association between shorter sleep duration and higher body weight. So what about when you do some sort of intervention and shorten sleep duration in an intervention? And that's what this study did. They took 225 subjects, and they had these subjects, the majority of them, they slept 2 baseline nights, like regular nights, at the sleep clinic. They had 5 restricted sleep nights where they slept less than 4 hours, and then 2 recovery nights. And then there was a control condition as well. So in this short period of this study, I think it was a maximum of 18 days that these people were observed. In the short study, people that were sleep restricted were more likely to gain weight, and they gained about an average of 1 kilogram within that like 2-ish week period of time. right? The control subjects also gained weight, but there was a significant difference in the weight that was gained in the sleep-restricted group. That is a lot. 1 kilogram, we're talking about 2.2 pounds on average in that sleep-restricted group. And you can see those results highlighted here, and the significance is shown there as well. And what's interesting about this study is they also compared both males and females and African American males and females, and they found that the weight change in Black people was higher compared to in a Caucasian population. And the change in weight in males was also significantly higher than in females as well. So really interesting. But if we kind of shorten people's sleep duration in this setting, in this experimental setting, we saw a change in weight as rapidly as in 2 weeks, like more than 2 pounds in 2 weeks. That increase in weight was believed to be due to an extra consumption of calorie, where the individuals in the sleep-restricted group, they consumed about 30 to 70% more daily kilocalories once sleep-restricted. And in part that makes sense because you're awake for longer, so you have more time to eat. But it likely goes beyond just hours awake and opportunities to eat. We're going to see in some other studies that there might be more of like some homeostatic, like endocrine and neurological factors that are promoting that increase in drive to consume food. So the sleep-restricted group, they also ate more meals. And like we said, more kilocalories, and they consumed a higher percentage of calories from fat, especially at night. And as someone that has definitely struggled with night eating in their past, this doesn't surprise me. You know, I don't want to eat salad when I want to eat late at night. It's usually something fatty and delicious. And another study that really shows this relationship well, so instead of looking at, the first study was like, let's just look at sleep duration versus body weight. Okay. And the second study is like, okay, well, let's lower sleep duration and see if that has effect on body weight. It does. It tends to promote an increase in body weight in that study at least. And then this study looked at, well, we have people participating in this weight loss intervention. Okay. We had 123 males and females who had obesity or overweight. BMI averaged around 33, and they went on a weight loss intervention of about 600 kilocalorie caloric deficit per day. And what these researchers noticed is that there was a correlation between sleep duration and percent of fat loss. So the longer people slept, the more likely they were to show a higher level of percent fat loss. Okay, and you can see the correlation coefficient there, but the results were significant. And this is especially shown in this last quote from the authors. J.P. Sheput out of the University of Ottawa, he actually has a lot of research on sleep duration, and I love his research because his name is Jean-Philippe, and that's also my husband's name, so I love to show his research. But anyways, him and his colleagues in their summary said that an increase by 1 hour in sleep duration was associated with a decrease of basically 1.5 pounds, okay, 0.7 kilograms in fat mass after adjustment for covariates, right? So they're saying that like the people that went on this caloric deficit plus got enough sleep or had higher levels of sleep, they were more likely to see a more significant change in their weight. And since we're kind of in the weight management section of the course, this is especially relevant because it is potentially part of one of the interventions we use for the management of overweight and obesity. So then the question is, how does sleep restriction increase obesity risk? And we already kind of saw part of this answer, which is that people tend to eat more, and that's what we're going to look at first. So in this study by Saint Ong, hopefully I'm pronouncing her name correctly, who's out of New York and who does a lot of this sleep and weight related research too. She's really worth looking up for that reason. They have a sleep clinic there, and they had 30 normal weight men and women who regularly got about 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night. I'm missing the T there, but that's supposed to say night. And they came into the sleep clinic. They had them sleep habitually, or they put them on a 4-hour restricted sleep schedule for 5 days. Okay. And then it was a crossover study. So all the participants did both of the experimental trials, right? So both of them participated both in the short sleep duration and the habitual sleep duration with like a washout period in between. And what they found is that in the individuals, so the individuals, when they were getting less sleep, there was a major difference in the amount of energy that they consumed. There was almost a 300 kilocalorie difference in consumption, increased consumption of calories in those that slept for a shorter duration of time. And you can see that it was statistically significant. And something that paralleled what we saw in that other study is that the majority of that increase in energy intake was due to energy from fat, specifically saturated fat, whereas the differences in carbohydrate and protein did not show statistical significance. Okay, so just to give you an idea of how some of these short sleep duration studies are done, and that we often see this higher consumption of calories in these shorter sleep duration studies. So if we want to go one level of evidence up from this, and we look at a systematic review and meta-analysis of sleep restriction studies, and this one this part of this study did a meta-analysis of 11 sleep-related, partial sleep duration studies, and they found that energy intake on average was in general about 400 kilocalories higher. That is significant. That is significantly higher. Like if you're using 2,000 kilocalories a day as a recommended amount of intake, obviously we vary quite a bit, but if we're just using that number, getting 400 kilocalories extra per day, that is an increase in 20%. Has a 20% increase in energy intake. So the relationship between shorter sleep duration and obesity really becomes clear. As far as mechanisms go, there's a lot of potential mechanisms that are leading to shorter sleep duration and an increase in energy intake that's potentially leading to an increase in obesity. And again, everyone's going to be a bit different, but we do see a fairly clear association there. I just wanted to offer kind of two pieces of research that argue for some of the mechanisms by which sleeping less makes us perhaps gain more weight. And in this other study, also by St. Ong, they found that individuals that had that restricted sleep, again, often we use 4 hours, they had higher neuronal activity in response to food stimuli. So you show them pictures of food and their system lights up, right? fMRI visualization shows more activation in brain regions when there is restricted sleep. And unsurprisingly, the brain regions that were really highlighted were those associated with reward. And we've talked a lot about in this class about the reward pathway and how that promotes this non-homeostatic, non-hunger, more of a want to eat instead of a need to eat, promotes this higher level of reward or drive to consume, cravings to consume food, right? We saw higher activation in the putamen, part of the basal ganglia, and then that we've seen the NAC, the nucleus accumbens, several times in this class, that hotspot, that hedonic hotspot that is one of the centers of that reward pathway. Okay, and we've talked about the prefrontal cortex and the insula, a little bit about the thalamus in this class too, how all of those areas are associated with mainly non-homeostatic appetite, but they're associated with homeostatic as well. Okay, speaking a little bit more to homeostatic appetite, but of course there are overlaps with this. We did also see, and this comes up a lot in the research, higher ghrelin levels during a sleep-restricted condition. So individuals that sleep less tend to have higher ghrelin levels. And we know ghrelin as our hunger hormone that has both effects on the non-homeostatic pathways and the homeostatic pathways of appetite. So this kind of helps us link, you're not getting enough sleep, well, your hunger hormones go up, and the second point, and also your desire to seek out rewarding foods, your cravings, you could call them, go up as well. Right? So once we know you don't sleep as much, your hunger hormones go up, your food cravings go up, unsurprisingly, your energy intake might go up, right? And unsurprisingly from that, that might also lead to an increased risk of obesity. So just kind of linking all of these things together. So what about physical activity? Does shortened sleep duration have an effect on physical activity levels? And quite honestly, the evidence isn't as clean or clear in this area. Some studies have shown an association between shorter sleep duration and changes in physical activity, and some haven't shown as much of an effect. But I did want to highlight this one study which showed that once we took people's regular sleep schedule and decreased it by an hour and a half, they tended to spend more time sitting during the day, and they had a slight decrease in low intensity physical activity during this 6-week study. Okay. However, in a systematic review of sleep and physical activity, they argue that a lot of the associations were small and quite varied. And in terms of like, which direction does it go in? Like, does physical activity affect sleep? And then does sleep affect physical activity? Like, which way is the direction going? But they did find that sleep quality, sleep efficiency, and what they called wake after sleep onset, these had a significant effect on whether a person participated in physical activity the next day. So it might have an influence on physical activity. I would say it's probably person dependent on whether that is a link and something you might want to explore with the people you work with, or consider if you're doing this on more of a personal level, you're listening to this, you might actually just reflect yourself. When I don't get enough sleep, do I end up moving my body less? Right? When I get more sleep, do I have more energy level, perceived energy levels, and do I end up working out more, right? There's going to be a lot of heterogeneity in the answers to those questions. Hopefully by this point, I've shown that a shortened sleep duration can increase risk of obesity, primarily through increasing energy intake. That increase in energy intake is likely due to maybe higher activations in the reward pathways, causing our drive to consume food, plus higher levels of that hormone, some of the hormones that make us hungry, or specifically ghrelin that makes us hungry, causing us to eat more. Okay, so we're in the obesity management unit of this course. So how do we use this information? Well, if we're working with individuals who are at a higher body size and are trying to lose weight, sleep might be part of the questions we ask them. Their sleep patterns, their sleep schedules, just the time they spend asleep. That might be part of perhaps an intake with an individual, or part of the conversation when we're trying to figure out, what's driving their desire to consume at higher levels. Okay. And if we do find that this person is like getting 5 hours of sleep every night, and this is one of the things that's affecting how much they eat during the day and maybe how much they exercise, well, then sleep might be a really important part of our intervention for that individual. And it might be an intervention for yourself as well in overall enjoying your life more. I would say sleep hygiene is just important for quality of life, but it also might make a difference in your weight. So I just wanted to summarize some of the key sleep hygiene messages that are supported by research these days. And a big part is kind of matching your light exposure to the natural patterns of the environment you're in, right? So when you wake up, we usually do that around when the sun comes up too. And in those early times of the day, that is the best time to view sunlight. Viewing sunlight at that time causes a number of endocrine changes, like an increase in cortisol, which helps you feel a little bit more awake. And that increase in cortisol is actually going to later lead to an increase in melatonin, which is something that's going to make you feel sleepier. So helping to view sunlight in the beginnings of the day kind of helps set your clock so you feel more awake during the day and more sleepy at the end of the night. Okay. But at the end of the day, if we're viewing very bright lights, including looking at our phone, which is really high in blue light, which we don't really want to see at the end of the day, that light exposure keeps us awake. So we have to be really careful with that. And I would just suggest using strategies like to dim the lights near the end of the day. And if there's a light in your room or your house that's like really bother you, when it bothers you, that's a sign that we want to minimize exposure to that light. Okay, so minimize blue lights, minimize screen lights, minimize really harsh and bright lights. Red lights probably are okay. So that's actually what we use in our bathroom for the middle of the night, is we leave red lights on so we can find the washroom if I have to go in the middle of the night, where it doesn't wake me back up. Okay, and then a dark room at night, that's really important. I use an eye mask to just basically shut the lights down. It's an inexpensive way to get a really dark room. Okay, obviously watch caffeine intake. Most of us have to limit it to the beginning of the day, but it really depends on the individual. Some people have genetic changes that make them be able to drink caffeine at all sorts of times of the day, and it doesn't affect their sleep schedules. This is a very individual thing where you need to figure out like what happens when you drink caffeine at different times of the day. Okay, and although some people think that drugs and alcohol help them sleep, they might make you think that you have to sleep, but they actually tend to affect sleep quality as well. We're talking marijuana, we're talking alcohol, obviously stimulants like cocaine and, well, caffeine too. Those can affect sleep, so watch your intake of those. We often recommend exercise earlier in the day than later in the day for sleep quality. That said, I'm always like, exercise when you can, but that might be something you consider as well, or when you're talking to your clients, that's what you consider. How is your exercise schedule affecting your sleep? And sometimes we might want to manage that so we don't like negatively affect our sleep schedule by exercising way too late at night. Okay, and then at night, dark room like we talked about, and a bit of a cooler room that tends to help us sleep as well. Okay, so some thoughts for sleep hygiene that you can use for yourself or for people that you're working with to help us manage weight and to honestly just help us enjoy our lives more, because as a lot of us can attest, when we don't get a good night's sleep, we're not necessarily the best versions of ourselves. I can be a bit of a jerk myself when I haven't slept well, so that's part of just like overall quality of life. Okay, so something to think about, and I will see you in the next lecture.